Welcome to Disruptive Fridays for the 1st of May 2020, the year of staying indoors. And we're going to have a special episode on the possibilities of resistance, of protest during the times of lockdown, which also are times of crackdown in some places where some governments are taking the opportunity to push new tough legislations and extend their own powers. And with me today, I have Stellan Vinthagen and Mauro Mondello. Let's see, can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah, I can hear and see you.
Very good. And I assume that also our chat and the audience can. I'll introduce you briefly. Stellan is a professor of sociology and a co-founder of the Resistance Studies Network. He has combined nonviolent action, civil disobedience, and research for decades now, being active, for example, in the movement against nuclear arms, and has accumulated about a years of prison time for these actions. Mauro Mondello is an investigative journalist who has covered, among other things, the Arab revolutions, refugee protests, for example, here in Berlin at the Oranienplatz, and also life under ISIS in the ground and in the field. And for us here at the Disruption Network Lab, we are preparing our conference Evicted by Greed at the end of May. About how global finance is disrupting housing, and this also for sure is affected now by the pandemic. In some ways, people are able to push for a stop to certain evictions, but others are having a very hard time actually getting momentum for their protests or for their acts of resistance. And the question is, how can you practice nonviolent resistance when just breathing on someone could be considered violence? But first, let's go to Mauro, who is focusing on what's happening in Poland and Hungary at the moment, where governments are extending their powers. And after that, Stellan will focus on the difficulties, but also new possibilities of resistance during and hopefully after this crisis. And for those of you watching, please take part in the chat, ask questions, try to be very concise so we can squeeze in a couple of questions and get some feedback to them. And yeah, with that, I give the word to Mauro.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for the invitation and for having me here. I will start talking about Hungary. I think, as most of you know, Hungary has been governed now for almost 10 years by Viktor Orban, and during his presidency, we've been seeing how the country, Hungary, slowly shifted from democracy toward dictatorship. I would not say that we have a dictatorship in Hungary, of course, but I think it's also quite difficult to state that there is a full democracy in Hungary. Right now, the country is somewhere in the middle between full democracy and dictatorship. And of course, this pandemic is creating a shift towards full dictatorship. How that happens? Actually, on March 23rd, the parliament gave the power to the government to rule by decree. And that means that right now the government does not need anymore to pass through the parliament in order to rule. And one of the first measures that the government decided to take was 5 years of imprisonment for individuals and organizations and media outlets that are spreading misinformation. Now the problem is what misinformation is. That's quite complicated to say because who is deciding what misinformation is the government itself. And that creates a big problem in the possibility of protesting and resisting to what the government itself is doing, because of course when you want to take action, but you need to think about the possibility that maybe a post that you wrote on Facebook or an article that you wrote on your blog could lead you to a 5 years of prison, well, that make the situation much complicated, because maybe you're thinking 2, 3, 4 times before to take action, to protest and to resist. So this is quite a concrete effect of what's happening in Hungary, and how this pandemic is helping the governments to control the possibility and the power of people to protest and resist. Again, in Hungary, what another thing that is happening in Hungary during this pandemic time, and it is very strong, is a law against the transgender community. On March 31st, the parliament started discussing a law, and this law say that adopted genders will not be anymore recognized in Hungary, and that will be reverted to the gender assigned at birth. This is a very huge change in Hungary, and of course is clearly an abusive law against the LGBT community in a country that has already has already a very discriminating government against the LGBT community. It's the same country that on November 2019 decided that no representative from Hungary should go to the European Eurovision Song Contest, because they say that this festival, this music festival, is too gay. So, I mean, again, this shows us how the government are trying to push the most polarizing parts of their agenda in a moment where it's much more difficult for people to take actions. What's happening in Poland? Poland president is Andrzej Duda, actually just the man of the strongman of Poland, that is Jarosław Kaczynski, and there will be a very important national election in Poland on May 10. It's a very controversial election because opposition and the European Commission and a lot of independent organizations say that it is not possible to guarantee a really democratic election because of the pandemic, because there is not the possibility for the opposition to be represented, so to express their thoughts and their beliefs. But the government decided to go on with, and again, they are using the power and the possibility to limit the gathering of people and the possibility for people to express their thoughts for resisting in power. But we have also good news from Poland, because 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, the parliament tried to tighten the abortion law of Poland, which is already one of the strictest legislation in Europe. They tried to make that law stricter, but this time, also in a time of pandemic, people reacted. An incredible reaction started both on social media and on the street, and I think the most interesting thing in this case is to describe what happened in Warsaw. A lot of people decided to go to the street and to surround the parliament, taking the distance, the security distance from one to each other, so 2 meter distance, but to let understand the government that was not because of the pandemic that they would go on with something like that. Actually, that had a result, because the parliament decided to not approve the law. The law came back to the Health Commission, that we now need to discuss again the law, and then probably in May the law will come back to the Parliament, but it's unlikely that will be approved. I think that this is quite an important example of how it's possible to resist and to react, also in a time on pandemic, also trying to rebuild the idea of manifestation in the street, the classic idea of resistance.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we had Berlin feminists as well writing to us about an action that they were doing. Let me see if I can share some pictures against the abortion ban. You can see on their website there's a lot of materials to download. I think we can post this in the chat. and using. So this black umbrella was already a symbol in previous demonstrations, Mauro.
Yeah, I think so, but this was something that became very, very important now because in a moment where it's a bit more complicated to build symbols because when you cannot really go to the street and when you cannot really express your thoughts and your belief in a very clear way, this kind of symbols become much stronger because transfer the message in a very easy way. And this is what happened in Poland in a very reduced amount of time. Just in 2 or 3 days, the word started spreading from one city to another, and in every major city in Poland we had demonstration and social activities against what was happening in the parliament, and this was very successful, and also showed to the government that it is true that the thoughts in a time of pandemic that the people is able to take action when the subject and the discussion become particularly important and when the civil rights are in danger.
Yeah, I'm wondering just briefly the role of the media, for example, in Poland and Hungary, because the more control you have, of course, the more you can suppress also these images, and so the question is to be able to be mobilized. If is it being covered, and if, in the case of Hungary, do you see similar possibilities there, or are there other obstacles to make people actually organize in this way?
It's a bit difficult to think. Two very different countries and two very different governments right now. Hungary has a very strict law on media. Also, before the pandemic, had a very strict law on media. Mostly, the Hungarian media are owned or controlled by outlets that are connected with Viktor Orban, while in Poland there are still a lot of independent media. Gazeta Wyborcza, for example, is one of the most important, and so in this sense, it's a bit different. Also, I would say, but this would be a much bigger subject. That are two very different society, because Poland is a country where there is not just the capital. There are a lot of cities very strongly engaged. Lodz, Wrocław, Lublin, Poznan, all these cities are a very huge civic community. Hungary is a bit more Budapest and the rest of the country. And this make a big difference in organizing civil movements, especially if you have not the support of media.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, then let's say give a word to Stellan, and then see if we can connect these things, because I think he also has probably some perspectives on exactly these dynamics. So yeah, I give the word over to Stellan for now.
Thank you, Jonas. So my argument is going to be that this crisis we live in now is both a threat and a possibility for the left. A threat that creates increased injustice and stress on already marginalized communities, but it's also a possibility forcing us to stop our everyday life and to reflect. As such, like all crises, it brings the opportunity for change of us as activists, and of the societies and the world. Like in Greece and Argentina, an economic crisis can sometimes give life to a revitalized, mass mobilized left with new creative strategies. Let's face it, the exploitative and destructive world economy has been brought to a standstill when we stopped consuming things we don't need. So our involuntary consumer boycott created a total crisis for capitalism. Isn't that what we want as socialists? And all this was initiated and coordinated by the states, for once determined of saving life, and those governments proved able to put out historical big economic packages to support those that lost income. But that has been almost exclusively to companies, and like before, without demands for change to a more ecological, sustainable, and fair economic system, it has been to preserve the problems we live with. And at some point, sooner or later, all populations will that we go back to normal. But we cannot go back to normal. Normal is the problem in the first place. The world system that creates increasing climate crisis, environmental collapse, and inequality. Now is a transition into something else, a different society. And now everyone, also outside of the radical left, knows it is possible if we want. You just download new programs, press the stop button, and restart like any computer. But where are the left? Do we have the new programs of the new society? The problem is that we on the radical left lack the clear idea and attractive visions of what else we want, what is beyond world capitalism. The tragedy is that it's today easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. We lack the radical imagination and the broad alliances among ordinary people that once made the left powerful. This, I would argue, is what we need to focus on. I hope we will deepen our relations online with fellow activists and citizens living far away, now when we are bound to our homes, that we socialize over tea and wine, a movie or a mutual topic, that we develop visionary plans for the future and reflect on how we live our lives. Are we really true to our values and principles? I hope we educate ourselves and network, that we focus on building broad alliances for the future. I am on the other hand worried about the increase of petitions, online meetings, and internet-based activism. Nothing wrong in itself. It can be helpful in combination with other means, but it will never replace the resistance when we face-to-face engage in socio-economic and political processes in the street, factories and offices, and on the land. Now it's time to reconsider our strategies and visions. I actually hope we will stop with the ritualized forms of protest like 1st May demonstrations. Perhaps not in Berlin, where it seems uniquely vibrant, but in most parts of the world it does not challenge anything at all. In Sweden, the Prime Minister from the Labour Party walks and shouts slogans together with workers. There is a mythology inherited from the liberals 200 years ago that we can change the society by walking from point A to B in urban areas, especially in the capital. But it's empty. It's an opium for the left. It's like Arundhati Roy said after the biggest protest in the world history against the Iraq War 2003, you do not stop a war with a weekend protest. You need to literally stop the companies that profit war. I hope we will see the value of instead focusing on equally an old tradition from the anarchists of direct action. When you see a problem, you mobilize a movement that deals with it, be that through creative alternatives like fair trade or by resisting our opponents through blockades, occupations of land and factories. The power of civil disobedience, strikes and interventions are so much bigger than protests and appeals. And as long as we as citizens obey the law, consume the products and services, and continue to produce what they demand as workers within factories, companies and universities, all the key problems will remain. Creativity is key during the pandemic. We need to think new, like the Spanish activists that did a virtual demonstration, or the anonymous that make disobedience via internet. And I hope we can see value of continuing to create mutual aid networks, growing food at home, supporting local shops, assisting marginalized groups as with the beautiful free online medical advice service offered, and continue to be more creative in designing activism. We need to come back after this lockdown with the radical imaginations of a new society and the necessary broad popular alliances to make them possible. I will end with just giving an example of what I mean. In the US, there is today, or the 1st of May, a beginning of a new kind of 1st of May, which is just the start of a series of 1st June, 1st July, and onwards. Initiated by the Black liberation community of anti-imperialists in Jackson, Mississippi. Here people are coordinating online in the arguably broadest left and progressive alliance in US history to combine worker strikes at Walmart, Amazon and Whole Foods with work slowdowns at other places, as well as rent strikes by tenants and motorcades with honk-ins. They are united under the slogan that capitalism is the virus. That, comrades, is the way forward. A happy class war day of 1st of May to all of you.
Thank you very much for that nice speech. I would like to ask both of you to if there are specifics from your experience, since you both have spent a lot of time on the ground. And I know in our debates and our events, of course, a lot of it is an investigative nature to understand a certain system of power, for example. But there is always a desire to understand what could the next steps be, and I think the collective imagination is a bit lacking, and it's always nice to be reminded of things, dynamics maybe of successful movements. That can be also small things. What makes a movement or a protest or a certain method function, that it's not really in our common vocabulary. Like we think there's a lot of symbolic demonstrations, and there is rioting in the media as it is portrayed, but it's not very commonplace to have a good discussion and imagination about what disobedience is. And so I'm wondering if there are examples from movements you have seen, been part of, that you draw inspiration from your personal experience.
Sure. You want to go ahead first, Mauro?
Yeah, I mean, this question made me think. Maybe I will not say something about a movement that I personally experienced as successful, but more about, for example, to me, listening to your question, it came to my mind the sense of community that we built up in Italy after the Second World War. Because I think that what really can make a change, and what we don't usually think when we talk about protest and resistance, is the necessity to build a wider community in that protest. Usually protest and resistance against governmental acts are always go on always in specific communities, political communities, social communities that are interested in a specific subject. I think we can make a big change in resistance and in taking action if we try to understand that there are situations that we need to consider more widely. I take the example of Italy after I know it's a very old example, but it came to my mind because in Italy after the Second World War, there were in the city of Rome, for example, there were anti-fascists and fascists that decided to fight against fascists, and there were Jews that were going to be taken by Nazi people to concentration camp in Germany, and all these people that before the war was all very divided, also during the war decided to all together to stay together to build a different kind of community, so to go over their usual community in order to resist. And I think this is quite important to go a bit more. To go more far than our sense of community.
This I found very interesting. We try to do it with the Disruption Lab as well, is to bring in very many different viewpoints and different approaches, and also our interest in whistleblowing also ties to breaking down or understanding like an opposition between whatever power and resistance to power, and see what the alliances on the inside of power might be that might disrupt the system from within. But of course, for many activists, it's very confusing to try to break up the us and them. Like you have a feeling that you have to have a clear target. So maybe later we can talk about if you have ideas of how do we actually do this? Like, what is an unexpected alliance that I should try to reach out to? How do we measure it? Do we see, okay, if the Nazis become very strong, maybe I should I try to make friends with them and find a common enemy? Now I'm just brainstorming, but to think about actually what are unexplored alliances. How do I find an alliance that might have a strong potential? Maybe in the chat you have ideas for that. But yes, otherwise, Stellan, what is something that is very inspiring to you?
All right. So just quickly first about this with unexpected alliances. I think that, for example, in Palestine, we have seen how soldiers from both sides, former soldiers from the Israeli army and soldiers from Palestine have united and fought together with civil disobedience against the occupation. So you can bring these kind of groups together in different ways that can be really key to change. So when it comes to inspiration, I draw from many places. We have, for example, the queer and the movement of gay and lesbian rights. They have fought very successfully the last kind of decades, shifting our norms and our understanding of what is an okay sexuality. And they have done that very much without civil disobedience. More with the creative interventions in the media and role models, people are outing themselves and so on, and others showing that this is a part of the normality. But I would say that it's basically a matter of struggle around power that this decides if a movement is successful or not. And my biggest inspiration comes from the landless workers in Brazil that occupy land, and on the occupied land they build also the new socialist society. So they are tremendously inspiring.
Yeah, I would also like to ask about get back to the question of disobedience and actually putting yourself on the line. Tying back to like discussions we have had at some of our events that often deal with the topic of surveillance, and geeks like us tend to get lost in how we can protect ourselves and hide ourselves. And I got a comment from older activists that were saying, well, we knew in the 70s that we had spies among us and we just tried to put them to work. They had to do the same work that we were doing. We didn't know who they were. You know, when the crackdown comes, then you have to show solidarity or be there for each other when people get arrested or similarly. So how do we get out of this laziness? And for us who are what is a way in to a responsible disobedience that we can practice? Well, I think also Extinction Rebellion is maybe popularizing this and giving ways in teaching how you can be part of a support structure for activists who maybe go out into the field and put themselves on the line. But also now during isolation, is there something we can do to actually at least be part of this support structure for people who are like these land occupy movements? Yeah, how can we actually either put ourselves on the line in a responsible way in solidarity with each other or support those who do?
Yeah. Who should go first?
Yeah, no, Stellan, I'll give it to you first.
All right. Well, I think it's a very important point that in order to make civil disobedience possible, particularly on a mass scale, you need much more people that are doing support work of different kinds. So when it comes to supporting, for example, the landless workers in Brazil that live already now under a fascist regime with Bolsonaro, and then they also have the lockdown. But there is a need for education, there's a need for support groups, there is a need for collecting of funding for people, there is for training to be organized, that could also be done online. There is a need for lawyers, journalists, and researchers to build different forms of support groups to help them when they're being attacked by the media and in false accusations, when there is a need to create reports of different kinds, when they're being sued, or when they are trying to get land by legal processes. So there are tons of things you can do to support this kind of work. So I think we need an infrastructure that makes mass civil disobedience possible. But to me, the lockdown situation is a time for reflection, developing strategies, connecting, building alliances for the time that will come when we can go out on the streets again.
Thanks. Mauro, any thoughts or other thoughts that arise?
Yeah, no, I agree with what Stellan say, and I think it's very important to understand that something very concrete that we can do, and that unfortunately many times we don't do as individuals, is to take position. Too many times we don't take position about specific facts, and to take position is already a huge kind of support for communities, individuals, and activists that are fighting. I also think that in order to the idea to be responsible, to be responsible during this pandemic, but to go on anyway with the activism, I think it's very important to consider the pandemic and the emergency not as a limitation, not just as a limitation, but as a factor. I think that when you resist, the resistance and the activism, resistance, protesting is never safe. You cannot consider the act of resistance as safe act. Of course, it's always something that put you out of your comfort zone. So I think it is really crucial to understand that in order to go on with the possibility to be active on the social and civil and political field, we need to consider the pandemic and this crisis not as a limit, but as a factor that we need to understand.
Testing. I can see myself. Mauro is there. Stellan is
Yes.
still frozen. Give a word to Stellan and then see if we can connect these things, because I think he also has probably some perspectives on exactly. Now I'm hearing myself from the past. That's interesting. Hi again. Good. Okay, that's first time that happened. Every week there has to be a different crisis, of course. Let's see. I'm hoping this goes out right now. Let's see. Huh? Yeah, I think so. Let's see. Tatiana is checking from another room. Hopefully she can tell me. Sorry, what? Is a sound problem somewhere? Maybe I think Mauro was maybe touching his mic a bit, but otherwise, yeah. Be careful with your headset there.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. First all-male panel, but yeah, I think we have a pretty good track record. Just too bad that me as a man had to be the first one to moderate the all guys club, but we'll make up for that. Otherwise, Elena, do you have some other questions from the chat?
Yeah,
yeah,
we
I think
have several
had...
in the chat now.
Hello. Yeah, I'm posting them to you, and I will read it just so the audience can follow what we are asking you. So yeah, this was a bit of a discussion also among us, because it's really a very fruitful discussion and questions you're opening here. So I will go like the first one from Mauro. Have you heard of any, I mean, I will ask the questions now and then I will sign out and you can reply them one by one. So have you heard of any demos happening today for 1st of May in Hungary or Poland? And another, I mean, in this line, another question, what are the possibilities for resistance in Hungary specifically, having in mind that Orban domination lasts for long in the past years, and it's not just a result of the COVID crisis? And two more for Stellan. First one is, what would the new program that you were mentioning look like? And how is this crisis empowering us, maybe? And another one for you, Stellan, it's more like, could you tell us a bit more about the situation in Sweden? It seems that the dilemma is often between protecting the economy or the vulnerable people, and the position of Sweden is quite different from the rest of the world. So yeah, what would be your take on it? And the general comment you already read, Jonas, because it was also as part of the comments that I was planning to read. So yeah, thanks once again from me. I'm signing out now and looking forward to hear your answers.
Yeah,
Mauro, you want to go first?
Yeah, I will answer to the question about the demonstration of 1st of May. No, I didn't. I didn't hear of any specific demonstration of 1st of May in Poland and Hungary, of course, also because of this pandemic. I think this is something that in all European countries share right now, about the difficulty to protest. I actually know that in Poland there is a huge social online campaign to try to go on trying to postpone the vote that they should have on May 10, and that today there was planned to have kind of Twitter storm in Poland in order to make more clear the resistance of a huge part of the country to go on with this, but nothing else. Hungary is a bit more complicated in general, and this pandemic is doing that much more complicated. About concrete possibility of resistance in Hungary, I think in this sense the possibility that of resistance that you have in Hungary are not very different than the ones you have in other countries. The context is different, but actually the possibilities to fight back and to take action are always the same. But the most important thing in Hungary is to involve into the political and civil debate people that is not in Budapest. This is the big challenge for the country right now, to let understand also to the people that is not living in the capital city what's really happening in the country, because that's the main problem of Hungary. So in my opinion, the what the activism in Hungary should focus on is try to enlarge and to make wider in the country the activism that right now is concentrated just in Budapest, Debrecen, and some other city, but not in the part of the countries that are not connected with Budapest.
Let's see, Stellan, did you have any other more ideas for what the new program would look like?
Well, I think the key for a new program would be that we are discussing it together and developing. But I can say some things. One thing is that we have to get away from the old left idea that there is one utopia that is kind of the vision for everyone that is the same. Instead, we are talking about something which is about a diversity of visions and differences along different contexts of the world. But we need to have something on a global scale that is at least taking into account a climate neutral way of economy and more of equality where the basic human rights are respected for everyone. And I think we need to have that as a minimum kind of standard, but then open up for diversities.
And about the situation in Sweden, I guess relating to the virus, do you have any take on it, or otherwise about? I think like the question of vulnerability is otherwise relevant when it comes to building bridges at this point.
Yes, I don't know if I think it's deviating a little bit to talk about the strategies because I don't know really how to deal with the virus. But Sweden has chosen one kind of strategy, and it makes sense. It's different. There are recommendations from the state instead of enforced laws and police and military on the street. And people do actually generally follow that. There's a 70% reduction of transport, for example, and people are generally staying at home. But we have more infections, we have more people dying because of that. But the idea is, of course, to build some herd immunity. But when it comes to vulnerable people, we know that the crisis is creating an exaggerated and stronger effect on vulnerable communities. And therefore, the alliance in form of mutual aid, in form of assistance, building collaborations are so vital, and I think it's necessary now for people's survival, but it's also a part of what it means to build alliances now. So that counts for Sweden, that counts for any place, and I am in touch, for example, with activists in India that are doing exactly this. And people in the US are doing that through the mutual aid networks. So exactly what's needed.
Right. It made me think of a situation the other day when it comes to trying to connect and build a community and show solidarity in the face of repression. It's maybe a small thing, but there are small stumbling blocks just in our building here, as in many places, hanging banners to protest the refugee camps, and some neighbor getting very upset about it, and from what we can gather, probably not from disagreeing on the politics, but being very scared of getting the attention of landlords, that is the Swedish real estate giant Akelius, that are happy to evict people for minimal reasons. And so who is the vulnerable person here, and just starting this conversation, having this conflict in the house, there it takes some personal courage and skill, while maintaining a distance of 2 meters to try to bridge this and understand what are we afraid of, and how can we support each other if we actually agree on this cause? Let's see, we had still a couple of questions. Here. Yes, yeah, we had the comment about on gender. Is there a way to, as a speaker, to choose to disengage from speaking on, for example, an all-male panel like this? Any comments on this?
Sure. I'm actually one that has signed a commitment of boycotting only male panels. So I guess I'm breaking that now. I'm sorry, but I have to admit I didn't think that two people made such a panel, but I think it's a very valid point. We should avoid all male panels.
Let's see. There was another one coming in. We have on social media. One question here. Social media is a sneaky weapon of capitalism and does, according to a lot of specialists, more damage than good to the society. Do movements really benefit from social media, especially now that many forms of protests are not possible? So weighing the good and bad there. And then we had the question of dependency on telecom infrastructure. How do you evaluate direct action that would disrupt it? Wouldn't it be counterproductive? And are there critical infrastructure of corporations that we shouldn't disrupt? What is the metric for evaluating direct action considerations? Yeah, who wants to go?
Well, I would just I would like to say that of course the problem of using social network for activism is connected if you're using just social network for activism. I know it's very banal to say, but it's an instrument. So if you consider an instrument and you find a way to use that instrument in order to help your activism, so I don't see a big problem. Of course, if you depend from that instrument, then it's a bit complicated to base all your activism and all your protesting and all your political activity just on social networks. But if you consider that as an instrument that is instrumental to your ideas, then I think it's possible to use in. To use it in a good way. But this always has to come with other kind of actions. For example, here in I am in Portugal right now, and of course it's not possible to go to the field to protest, but there is an issue about refugees. So there is a group of university students of the University of Porto. They decided to go to the supermarket, that of course is allowed, always carrying a flag where is written, "Don't forget the refugees." So that's a very small action, but that's very good because everybody's looking at them when they go to the supermarket. Everybody's looking at that flag, and a lot of people is asking them why they're carrying that flag, what that means, and that's being active in a moment of pandemic. So social networks are useful. They always need to be connected with small actions like this.
I totally agree with Mauro here. I think there is an over belief in social media. It is helpful if you use it in the right way, but we should be very aware that it's an excellent tool for surveillance as well. It's kind of the wet dream for the surveillance state with all that we share on social media. And already in 1848, European activists were organizing revolutions all over Europe by communicating with very easy means, like having leafletters that were distributed through the trains all over Europe. So we can communicate in many different ways, but it is useful, but it's definitely a part of the capitalist system.
And about the question about actually disrupting telecom infrastructure in these times as a method of action. I mean, I know for sure any kind of online disobedience is often in many places classified as cybercrime or even high treason, and you are punishable by hundreds of years in prison. So that's one part of it. But otherwise, like, is there a responsible way that even makes sense of being disobedience against our infrastructure? Yeah.
Well, I mean, of course, in a crisis situation when we are dependent on it for running hospitals and
Are you there?
I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I lost Stellan, I think.
Yeah, me too.
Let's see if we can get
companies.
Stellan. Oh yeah, there. Sorry, we lost you there for a bit.
Oh,
You were saying about in these times where hospitals are depending on these.
In these times it's not very helpful to undermine the whole infrastructure, but you can target certain companies like the weapon factories or the coal factories. You can have direct influence on them through disobedience on the internet, and like with all kinds of actions, you have to make sure that people understand you. So it's a matter of making a communication about what are you doing, do you know why you're doing it, and can you explain it? So you cannot just do a general thing that is trying to sabotage the whole infrastructure. That's irresponsible.
Yeah. Mauro, do you have something to add? We're running out of time and need to give the word as well to my colleague Nada. But anything else, Mauro, you want to add?
No, I just totally agree with what Stellan said. I think the nectar disobedience also on the telecommunication side is acceptable if you can explain it. Exactly, I always say it. If you just do randomly, that's a bit more complicated in a moment like this. But if you can explain it, then yeah, that's acceptable.
I would also. Thanks. Now, I would also recommend our conference. Well, first of all, we did the conference we did together with you, Terror Feeds. Maybe we can post it in the chats, and also our conference Stunts, where we had Stellan's colleague Jörgen Johansson giving a very interesting talk on creative actions. And my favorite there was activists breaking into prison, demanding their fair share of prison time because they agreed completely with the action that an activist had taken. And so there's a lot of good stuff there that we need to further explore. But yes, time is running out, and we had some technical problems, but I think we covered a lot of interesting ground. Before I let you go, I will invite my colleague Nada here to say some words about next week's topic. Are you there? Hello.
Yes. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I had an issue with the mute and okay. Thank you, Jonas, Stellan, and Mauro for this interesting conversation. And I would like to invite you for our next edition of the Disruptive Friday on the 8th of May. And for this one, we'll be in conversation on harm reduction and queer care within the queer feminist self-organized communities. And we will be discussing on how these collectives are continuing their work now in the times of pandemic and isolation, and how to work with the digital tools in this current situation on harm reduction, care, relief, acceptance, and emotional support. So amid the shutdown of all places, we would speak with a group of collectives on how are they doing now and what are they planning for the future with their work. So we'll have with us Pedro Marum, from the Xeno Entities Network. He will be representing them, and Mina and Suspension Collective. And we will have other representatives that we will announce their names very soon from TS Raver, Emotional CPR, Licken, and Cosmic Care. So stay tuned. We're going to announce the more details very soon on our website and Facebook. And see you next Friday at 5 p.m. Thank you again. And now I leave the last words to Jonas.
Thank you. Just ask the audience to follow us, sign up for newsletters, etc. Now, May, we will be very active. We have next week on Wednesday, we have our workshop on mapping Berlin's property owners, where you can learn to figure out which investor through which shell companies actually bought your. Let's see if I can show that. No, I can't. But yes, who owns your house, and is there something you can do about it? It will be a fun investigative workshop. And at the end of May, we will have more. We'll have one workshop coming up on ad busting for the right to housing, subvertising for the right to housing. Please sign up for that one, and then we will have our main conference with great speakers from around the world, covering different movements for the right to housing and exploring how the financial system is being exploited to take over our housing market. So thanks also to our team, to Elena, Tatiana, Like, Nada, and Steph. You see, I'm the only guy here. And thanks to Ranav at Boiling Media, who has handled the stream and got us back when we fell into the digital abyss, and doing this video mixing remotely, which is quite a challenge. And we're all learning a lot from it. And again, Stellan and Mauro, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then see you next Friday.
Bye.